The last talk I gave, and if anyone can't hear me, if anything goes wrong, wave a hand or something. My last talk was about Anjin, a settled heart, a settled mind. So today, I'd like to explore what a settled heart in a world on fire is. But how can you have a settled heart in a world on fire? Shakyamuni gave a very famous sermon teaching called the Fire Sermon. It's probably an awkward, he didn't call them sermons, I'm sure. He was addressing a large group of monks and nuns. And he said, everything is on fire. All is burning. And what is all that is burning? The eye is burning. Visible forms are burning. Awareness through your eyes is burning. Feeling is on fire, and things that you feel and the awareness of them are all on fire. Consciousness is on fire. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of greed, with the fire of hate, with the fire of delusion. Everything is burning with sorrow, suffering, grief, and despair, burning with the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. So this is rooted in the very deep soil of our tradition. We can easily see the world around us on fire. The war in Ukraine, the shootings, the terrible shootings in Uvalde, and then in Ames, Iowa. If you've read Marilyn Robinson's books, that's basically where she sets this very quiet, introverted minister and people in a very gentle, really, small town. So they had a mass shooting there too. Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then there's insurrection at the Capitol. There's racism. And then there's road rage on your way home, or in this case, on your way out, when you venture out next. So yes, the world around us is on fire. But what is the source of these conflagrations? Not some impersonal force, not an angry God shooting lightning bolts. The world is burning, as Shakyamuni pointed out, due to human greed, hatred, and delusion. Our greed and hate light the fires and then fan the flames. I have a little frog that has taken up residence in my throat, so I may get a little hoarse. Shakyamuni goes on in his fire sermon to say, seeing thus, the wise disciple becomes dispassionate toward the eye, forms, feeling, the mind, and his greed fades away, and with the fading of greed, her heart is liberated. Dispassionate. Dispassion is not uncaring. It's not the opposite of passion. It is even-handedness, open-mindedness. It's open, it's not partial to one side or another. That's what dispassionate means. It's not greed, it's not clinging, and it's not biased. As our greed fades, its effects in the world around us dissipate with it. And as our greed expands again, so its effects in the world around us expand again. As our hate and rancor fade in us, they fade in all we do. And the human world is made of nothing other than all we do. So we have to find our practice, our direction, and our settled life here in the world on fire. where life is complicated, full of hardship and suffering. Because if you think that you can only settle your life where these conditions do not apply, you cannot settle your life. It's always somewhere else, the settling, never where you are. But how do we do this? How much of the world's craziness and war and poverty and need belong in our lives, or can fit in our lives? How can we put out the fire? How can we put out the fire in us? The Dharma says from the get-go that suffering or dissatisfaction is an unavoidable factor in our lives. And it's clear that we don't live in a universe where we can exit suffering and look back from a transported realm of perfect peace. My friend John McCrae, who was a fine Zen scholar, once said that once we started Mahayana Buddhism, there was no longer an off-ramp on the highway of liberation to getting off. There's no off-ramp. We're on this highway. This is the universe, the world. If we turn away from suffering, our peace is unstable and it will implode because we aren't noticing what's happening or taking account of it. But if we turn towards suffering, we don't feel peaceful and we get overwhelmed. What's a kid to do? I said last time that Anjin, the settled heart, includes anxiety and distress. Well, actually, it includes your whole life. A settled life in one corner is not a settled life. It's your whole life that needs to settle. So how do we hold both sides of, we might feel as peace and rancor, anger? We hold both sides imperfectly. We hold both sides inconstantly. Perfection is not on offer in this world. Complete steadiness is a false ideal. It sometimes looks in our Zen practice, when we're doing our formal Zen practice, we have a Zendo, we have forms, we sit very still, we walk very still and slowly, as though we are aiming at some kind of total steadiness. But that's not it. We're aiming at a steady container for our unsteady lives. Because complete steadiness is a false ideal in a world on fire, in a world of endless change. Just take the change. This is a world that is endlessly changing. How can you be completely steady in endless change? How can you be completely steady as a limited human being? And it's the only kind available for practicing. Because this is not a tradition, a practice, and a path for perfect beings. It's a path for us. So if you try to cut off from the world's messes, we'll do that sometimes, but when and if you try to cut off from the world's messes, that effort cuts you off from yourself as much as it does from the world. And of course, it doesn't really work. The world is still there, messy, intruding, and your messes are still there in you, even if you try to cut off from them. It's important to take this to heart. Interdependence is not just rhetoric. It is how things are. So to cut off from the world's distress is to box in your heart, limiting your access to the world and to your own heart. It doesn't protect you, and it's not sustainable. And in the end, it's not peaceful. And to try to cut off from your own distress has the same outcome. So how do we engage in the world on fire, in us and outside us, while aiming at a settled heart? We live here. We live here in the world that is at once the Saha world of suffering and limitation and the world of peace. And we are at home here when we know our true belonging in the whole of it. So what is true belonging? It's closely connected to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. To arrive at this, there's an opera called The Dialogue of the Carmelites. It's a very moving story and a very moving opera by Poulenc, so it's a modern opera. It's about a group of nuns who, in the French Terror, are told they must renounce their world, their vows, their practice, their community, and they refuse and are executed for it. And they became very famous as a result. So the opera takes us through that, but in the early part of the opera, a young woman comes to the abbey and wants to become a nun. And the abbess asks her why she wants to leave the secular world. She's a well-born young woman and has plenty of money and family support. The novice says, "The world is terrifying. I want to be protected by the rule." That would be the Benedictine rule that she would enter. "You have it backwards," the nun says. The abbess answers. She says, "It is our job to protect the rule." And for us, to take refuge in the Buddha, in Dharma, and in Sangha is to vow simultaneously to protect Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We need to see how it is that in taking refuge in Buddha and Dharma, we are supporting Buddha and we are honoring Buddha and we're taking care of the Dharma. And refuge in Sangha is just like that. Cherishing and taking part in Sangha is what sustains Sangha. Our true belonging is always a mutual give and take flow. It's never cut off from anything. It's difficult to sustain our faith in this, even to be able to taste it enough to be able to keep following that way. And difficult to sustain our practice and to be awake to how this deep reality functions in the world and in our lives. This deep world of give and take, of flow. So Bill McKibben has a new book. I think I read most of his books. I've brought him in before. I invoked Bill. So his new book is called The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. It's about his loss of faith in things getting better after so many years of dedicated activity. Now I haven't gotten the book yet. So far I've only read about it. I will get it soon. I'm not saying that he's having a great spiritual crisis, but he's as a doubt in what he has believed, what he's had faith in. He sees deterioration in what he grew up believing in. He grew up believing in patriotism, flag, religion, cross, and a 20th century suburban home lifestyle. And he looks back and sees how he's been deceived into thinking that the patriotism of the flag was a positive force when patriotism encourages imperialism. That religions have fomented war, and that the suburban 20th century lifestyle was based on unfair privilege. So these ideals were always full of holes, always unreliable. Now, he didn't know that. Bill McKibben believed, and he invokes Martin Luther King Jr.'s very famous statement from a 1968 speech, a statement echoed by President Obama. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Now McKibben depths that too. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So this arc and its endpoint, its all-important endpoint, are about true belonging. They're about faith. Faith in humanity, faith in goodness. So is it a believable ideal, or is it just another unreliable one? We cannot know the future, so we can't see the future of this arc or any other. We look at the arc from past to now, and what we see depends on where we stand. Viewpoint is a literal statement. From one viewpoint, it looks one way. From another viewpoint, it looks very different. Looking from now, but you see something. So we look from the past to now, and we see something, and since it's what we see, we think that's how it is and has been, forgetting that there are an infinite number of viewpoints. And none of our viewpoints see the whole thing. Looking from now into the future, we can't know that what we do now will contribute to a particular outcome. Crystal balls don't work. We are not fortune tellers. We're not foreseeing an outcome that is somehow predetermined. We do not live in that kind of deterministic world. So, but this is a very powerful ideal, that the arc of the moral universe is long but bends toward justice. So, revisualizing this arc of the moral universe, I see entwined paths. How we construe our path of life and how it interweaves with others are of immense importance. So paths can be shaped by so many forces, by rules, by beliefs, by ideals. But there's a shakiness there, as McKibben found. And the shakiness is not just because of having sort of the wrong ideal. It also doesn't mean that having ideals is wrong. Not saying that either. But the shakiness of the ideal is inherent in all activities in an impermanent world. When we feel shaky in our lives, that's reality. That's the earth moving under our feet. So the peacefulness of Anjin includes our anxieties, and we need a path and a direction to take this into account, to take into account the shakiness of us and of our world. And the best way to shape a life path, including the shakiness and my insecurities and inabilities, my limitations, is the Buddha way. The Buddha way isn't one path. It's never rigid, it's not rule-bound, and it's not fixed. The Buddha way, the Buddhist path, is all about direction. Its direction is our intention. The Buddha way doesn't have a direction outside of the direction of the intentions of the people who are living the Buddha way. Our vows are a language for our intention and aspiration to live in accord with the reality of Dharma as it unfolds as time and space go on, with and for all beings, ourselves, and each other. What I'm saying is the Buddha way is an arc of a moral universe that does not guarantee outcomes, but is the more reliable because of that. It's a way of living stably in an unstable world, not denying the instability of the world and of our own lives and of our society. It's more than that, not just not denying those unstable realities, but taking them into account. We take the instability into account the way a bridge can be built to withstand wind and storm and earthquake, taking them into account. And a bridge can only sort of withstand those forces by moving, but not so much that it falls apart. So this Buddha way that takes all into account, doesn't guarantee outcomes, but provides a direction and a way to live. This is where we find our home ground, never in stasis. It's always a home that has room for us as deeply imperfect people. And if it doesn't have room for love, it's not ground worth standing on. Now I say home ground, but that's only an image. There is no literal ground that is safe or reliable. Long term. Short term, maybe. How short is short? There's no built home or lover's arms that will always hold. And that's why we speak of the Buddha way, the path, as our home, as a true home. It's very fine to love someone. I'm all in favor. It's very fine to care for a home and to have beloveds, but it's never fine to cling to them. That is the becoming static, is the clinging to them. First of all, they can't be clung to. That leads to suffering, as we've all discovered in our lives and need to heed. And second, it will distort the very thing you love to cling to it. Everything is in a deep sense provisional. It is reality as it is, and we are all provisional. It's not wrong that everything is provisional, that we are provisional beings, that, as I once said to someone's dismay, I'm only provisionally a teacher. It's not wrong. It's just how things are. And yes, it's hard for us. It's very hard for us, because we mix clinging in with our love. Very hard to disentangle them, to love without clinging. But we can keep aiming at that. And it's naturally so that it is hard for us to love without clinging. That's how it is for humans. Never perfect, but very worthwhile. So much as we aren't perfect, I'm also not suggesting that life should feel dizzy all the time. Sometimes, yes, inevitably, when our life or the world turns sort of faster than we are prepared for, we feel dizzy. But just as the world keeps turning, and we don't generally notice the motion except by tracking the sun and moon, we think they're moving because we're so self-centric, so too our home ground or our path will sometimes feel as though it just holds still for us. That's fine as a feeling. Just don't be fooled into thinking, now my life is settled and I can relax. Maybe for a moment. No harm. But then we get up and go. A Japanese, very senior Japanese teacher came to Hokyoji in Minnesota when I was practicing there under Katagiri Roshi. And at the end, he gave each of us who'd been there for, 8 or 10 days with him, working closely, he gave each of us a little calligraphy with a little image on it, his own work. And of course, I didn't understand mine. Katagiri had trouble translating it, and someone else said, oh, what it says is, drink tea and go. This is sort of his Zen motto. Sit down, enjoy closely the rich flavor of that cup of tea and the cup you're holding and the person you're having tea with and the surroundings around you, and then get up and go on to the next thing. So what I'm saying is that we can't know that the future bends toward justice, but we can live in that direction with that intention now, here. So the arc bending toward justice can be how we live now and thus true. We are not responsible for the future, but each now I'm responsible. Can I live in such a way that my life is part of an arc bending toward justice? Each of us is unique, and how we integrate the world's problems and our own problems, and the world shining in glory and love, and our own peaceful self, this integration is the work of our whole lifetime, guided by the Dharma, guided by our vow, our evolving vow, guided by each other. And one of the great ways to explore that integration is Dokusan. Some people think it's just about having a question. Well, and I shouldn't talk about my life. Well, I think our lives are what we have to talk about. The Dokusan is an inimitable Soto practice for exploring our unique Dharma paths. And that's what Uchiyama Roshi would mean by refining your life. It's not becoming all buffed. It's refining your understanding and ability to live fully your life in the light of the Dharma. The sorrows of the world are our sorrows. Love, anger, solace, and peace mingle in our hearts. How could it be otherwise? It would be an impoverished life. So a settled heart is a heart settled in reality, in the reality of all made of all, in the reality of endless change, where we aim as steadily as we can at walking the Buddha way through it all. Wobbling included. As is famously said by yet another Zen master, the way opens as we walk. That is to say, it is not a pre-existing way extending into some rainbow bridge future. The way happens as we walk. It opens, it happens as with each footstep we take, and nowhere else. The Buddha way opens as we walk, hand in hand, laughing and crying, through all weathers, through all interstates, through all the clanging and singing world.